Masechet Nazir Daf Lamed Daled. This is the last daf in the fifth perek, and then we will actually begin the sixth perek as well. Okay, this last Mishnah follows up on the previous Mishnah where people make a vow that is Shimon, no, I think it's not Shimon. And so this is a similar case, but as we're going to see, it actually is different in a fundamental way. ראה את הכוי ואמר הריני נזיר שזה חיה, הריני נזיר שזה אינו חיה, הריני נזיר שזה בהמה, הריני נזיר שאין זה בהמה. So a person is actually going to be 9 people here in the end. So the first person, they all see a koi. What is a koi? We're not sure how to identify this animal. Some people think it's a water buffalo. Others think it's a mouflon. Okay, whatever it is, it has some aspects that are similar to a behema, domesticated animal, and some that are similar to a haya, right? So it has different aspects. In some ways it's similar to both, in some ways it's similar to neither, in some ways it's similar to one and not the other. Okay, this makes a difference in various halachot. For example, is the chelev, that parts of those parts of the fat forbidden like a behema or permitted like a haya. Okay, so now a person sees this koi, and there is just a fundamental safek that is not resolved, is not resolved and not resolvable, right? Some rabbis say maybe it's just like neither. It's its own category. Okay, so he sees this koi and he says, "Oh, I am a nazir that this is a chaya." And then the second person says, I'm a nazir that it's not a chaya. Third person says, I'm a nazir that it's a behema. And the fourth person says, I'm a nazir that it's not a behema. All right, so far 4 people. Now, the next person says, Hari nazir shezeh chaya u behema. Right, I am a nazir if it's both. Hari nazir she'en ze lo chaya velo behema. So a 6th person says, I'm a nazir that it's neither a chaya nor a behema, right? But some third category. Hareni, 7th person says, Hareni nazir shechad mikem nazir. So the first 6 are addressing the koi itself and its status. But the 7th, 8th, and 9th are discussing all the first 6. So the 7th one says, I am a nazir if one of you 6 are a nazir. So it sounds like, well, at least one of them has got to be Nazir because they said every possibility. Now, this 8th one says, Hareni Nazir she'en echad mehem mikem Nazir. I'm a Nazir if one of you is not a Nazir. And finally, the last one says, Hareni Nazir she'kulchem Nazirin. I'll be a Nazir if all of you previous ones, those 6 and these last 7 and 8. Well, what's the final law? So we could work out the logic and see, if it is a behema, who would be? If it is a chaya, right, who would be? But the surprising answer is, Hare kulan nazirim, all of them are nazirim, even though they said completely opposite things and opposites of opposite things. Nevertheless, they're all nazirim. So notice there's no machloket here, as there was in the previous Mishnah. So how can we explain this surprising ending of this Mishnah and of the Perek? So there's 2 or 3 ways to explain it. Number 1, maybe this whole Mishnah is following Bet Shammai. We saw Bet Shammai says a person is a Nazir even if they took the Nazirut in error, right? Even if he thinking that this is a behema or thinking that this is Shimon. I'm a Nazir if that's Shimon. Turns out not to be Shimon. He's still a Nazir because even though he is in error, at the time he thought it was Shimon, even though it's an error, still he's a Nazir. And so in all these cases, right, whether it's true or not, doesn't matter. Even if he's in error, the person's a Nazir. So that's why all of them are Nazirim. Okay, so that's explanation number 1. The problem with that is it doesn't say it's Bet Shammai. It's a Stam Mishnah. So would a Stam Mishnah just be like Bet Shammai and that's it, and not note any other opinion? That's hard to say. So option number 2 is that the previous Mishnah ended with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon said that, and that was within Bet Hillel. Rabbi Shimon said, if there's a safek, we're not sure, like in the case of the heap, and you're not sure if it has more than 100 cord or not, and then it gets stolen, so you have to assume stringency, and you have to practice Nazirut just in case. So, according to the Rabbi Shimon, all of these 6 are in a state of doubt. And therefore, they all have to practice Nazirut, right? The one who said, "I'll be a Nazir if it's a Chaya." So if we go Esk Eliyahu Navi. What is it? If it turns out it's really a Chaya, that person is definitely a Nazir. But assuming that we don't know, so the person is a Safek Nazir, which according to Rabbi Shimon still has to practice Nazirut. So now actually they're all Safek, right? All 6 of them are going to have to be Nazirim mi Safek. So now number 7 says one of you are Nazir. Well, for sure one of them is in fact a Nazir, because one of them is right. And the other one says, I'll be a Nazir if one of you is not a Nazir. Well, one of them is wrong. So even though they're all practicing Nazirut mi Safek, right? At least one of them doesn't actually have to be a Nazir as a definite, right? He's just keeping it misafek, but is actually wrong in his if statement, and therefore would not have to be vadai. So they're all practicing Nazirut, but don't absolutely have to. So that he's also right. Right, so that's like the famous story, right? The 2 people come to the judge and they say opposite things, and you're right, and he says you're right. And he says, how could they both be right? He says you're right too, right? So in the sense, yeah, because of the safek, right? Well, at least one of them is a Nazir, and at least one of them is, and in fact, in reality, not a Nazir. So therefore, since all these 6 and the last 2 are Nazirim, so they're all Nazirim, and so that's why the 9th person who says, if you're all Nazirim, he's right too, and they're all Nazirim. All right, that's the second way to interpret it. There is yet a third way, which is that of the Rambam, and here we get yet another chance to see the Rambam's innovation in looking for the peshat of the Mishnah. Rambam say we don't even have to follow the Bishimon here, who's after all a minority opinion in the previous Mishnah. It can even follow the Yehuda, who is anonymous in the previous Mishnah. The Rabbi Yehuda is the one that said, whenever there is some doubt, then you can be lenient, and you don't have to worry about it, like in the case of the pile of wheat. If there are 100 or not, it gets stolen. He says, well, you're not sure and you can't check. There's no way to know. So then you're not a Nazir. You don't have to practice Nazirut out of doubt. And so according to the Rambam, you could say, actually, these cases, they're not in doubt, because a koi does have some aspects that is like a chaya. So if you say if it's a chaya, then you are correct. There are some aspects of it that are not like a chaya. So saying it's not like a chaya is also partially true. It's like if you have a zebra, right? If I say it's black, you're right. If I say it's white, you're right. If I say it's not black, you're also right, because it's not all black. If I say it's not white, if I say it's white and black, that's true, right? If I say it's not white nor black, that's also true, because it's not all white and not all black, but only somewhat. And so if you have something that has aspects of both, right, think of like a Venn diagram with 3 circles, chaya, behema, and then koi is overlaps both, and in some ways it overlaps both of them in the middle, and some over only this one, and some only that one. So since in some way it is and is not like chaya, and is not like behema, all of these statements are actually absolutely true, not misafek, right? It is true that there is some aspect of it that is a behema, and it's true that there's some aspect that's not a behema, there's some aspect that's both, and there's some aspects that are neither, and that would be why all of them are definite nizirim. All right, so fascinating. We have these 3 interpretations. Now, the Gemara itself is going to give its own 2 interpretations about these 9. Are they 9 people or 9 periods of Nizirut for one person? So Taneh Hada Tisha Nizirim v'Tanya Idach Tesha Niziruyot. One Baraita says this, commenting on the Mishnah, that the Mishnah involves 9 different individuals who each have to practice one Nizirut obligation. But and that's easy to understand. But the other one says, no, we're talking about one person. Then there is a case where one person would have to, obligates himself to 9 periods of Nizirut. Now, let's analyze. It's easy to understand that there are 9 individuals who are each Nizirim. For example, you have a lot of people there, and they all see this koi, and each one makes a vow with a condition that is associated with the koi. One said it's a behema, one said it's chaya, right? And so that's 9 different people, as we explained the Mishnah. But how could you ever have a case like this where there'll be 9 obligations on one purpose? We can understand for the first 6. One person can look at the koi and say, I'm a Nazir if it's a behema. And then he makes another vow, and says, I'm a Nazir if it's not a behema. I'm a Nazir if it's a chaya. I'm a Nazir if it's not a chaya. I'm a Nazir if it's both. I'm a Nazir if it's neither, right? So one person can take all of those 6 variants of a vow. And so, since they're all somewhat true, then he will be a Nazir 6 times. But the last 3, how could it be? Because the last 3 we're talking about other people, right? And this person number 7 says, I'll be a Nazir if one of those guys, or if none of those, one of those guys is a Nazir, one of the guys not a Nazir, if all of them are a Nazir. So he can't do that about himself if there's only one person. So we have an answer. Here's the case. You have 9 people, and they went through what we just said. And then there's a 10th person that's looking at them and says, I'm going to be a Nazir and I'm going to accept upon myself the number of Nizirut obligations that there are among those 9 people, right? So whenever it is, he hears them and they said, oh, that's what a great case. Whatever, add up all the obligations or whatever it ends up being, and I'm going to take upon myself all those back to back, successive. And so since all 9 are Nizirim, that 10th guy who says that will have to observe 9 Nizirut obligations, one after the other. Hadran alach bet Shammai. And so that completes the 5th perek, and now we get to go to the 6th perek. The 6th perek actually is going to introduce some really fundamental, basic points about a Nazir that actually would have been helpful to know right up front, but for some reason we waited until the 6th perek to learn these basic prohibitions regarding a Nazir. So it begins like this: Shelosha minin asurin ben Nazir. There are 3 categories, types, species of prohibitions that relate to a Nazir. Ha-tum'ah v'hatiglachat v'hayoseh min hagefen, that they cannot become tameh lamet, and cannot shave his hair, and anything that comes from a vine is prohibited to the Nazir. Okay, those are the 3. Now the 3rd one is the one we're going to elaborate on the most. That's probably why it's last in this list, even though it's mentioned first in the Pisukim. Now, v'chol hayosim min hagefen mistarfin zeh im zeh ve'en hayav al sheyochal min ha'anavim kazayit. All the different things that come from the vine can combine with each other in order to make a shi'ur, and the shi'ur, in order to be liable of lashes, is a kazayit. So therefore, if someone only has a little tiny bit of a grape, a Nazir, that it's prohibited, but they're not liable to lashes until they eat a kazayit. But the kazayit can be made up of the skin, the seeds, right? Even if it's half a kazayit of this and half a kazayit of that, those add up together to make a whole. Not all prohibitions add up together. For example, on Yom Kippur, if someone has a half of a shi'ur of drink and half of a shi'ur of food, they do not have to add up together, right? They're considered separate categories, which is why if someone is sick, they can have up to less than a shi'ur of drink, less than a shi'ur of food at the same time, and that will not add up to a deoraita violation. So far we have the first elements of a definition of hayoseh min hagefen, but the rest of the Mishnah is now going to trace a history of this law that we add up to a kezayit, and we're also going to speak in the entire daf of what does this mean? Anything that comes from a gefen, from the vine, does that include the seeds, the skins, the wooden parts of the vine, the leafy parts of the vine, and so so on. So we're going to have to define this precisely. So here we go. Mishnah Rishona omeret ad sheishte rebi'it yayin. Rabbi Akiva omer afilu shara pito bayayin v'yesh ba kedei lesaref kezayit hayav. So now we see that actually what we just said is the last halacha, the end of the process, that it's a kezayit. But there was an earlier stage of the halacha, an earlier mishnah, all right, an earlier layer of the oral law that said, no, not a kezayit. It used to be a revi'it of yayin. Now, revi'it is a liquid measure. Kezayit is a dry measure. So it used to be based on a liquid measure. Revi'it is significantly bigger than a kezayit. So that was the law originally, and then it became more stringent. And so Rabbi Akiva said, we're going to use a dry measure of a kezayit, and not only that, we're going to include within the kezayit even something permitted. For example, if you had some bread and some wine, the bread got soaked in wine, and let's say the bread is half a kezayit, and the wine that it's soaked up is also half a kezayit. Now we consider it all together to be one kezayit, and if a Nazir eats that, even though he's only having a half of a kezayit of wine, it combines with the bread that it's soaked into and makes a full kezayit. So Rabbi Akiva taught this stringency, and that's the basis of the bottom line law that we just saw. Now, v'chayav al hayayin b'fnei asmo, v'al hanavim b'fnei asman, v'al harsanim b'fnei asman, v'al hazagim b'fnei asman. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah omer en chayav ad sheyochal sheneh harsanim v'zag. So now there's another machloket. The first opinion says one is liable to lashes if one had just wine by itself and he had a kezayit of wine, even if he didn't have any other parts. That is its own prohibition. And if he had just grapes by themselves, and also if he had skins by themselves, or the seeds by themselves, had a kezayit of grape skins, that by itself will make the person liable, according to the first opinion. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, however, is more lenient, and he says, no, you're not chayav until you have both shnei charsanim and azag, two charsanim, which we're going to see exactly what that means, but we're going to see it refers to the skins. So you have to have two skins of grapes and one seed, because that's singular. He's deriving this from the pasuk that says mecharsanim is plural. So here it translates as seeds or skin. We're going to see machloket which is which. So here charsanim, skins, vadzag, singular, whatever that is, if it's a seed. So you have to have both of these, because it says from this to this don't eat. So only if you violate the entire span of the things mentioned here, right? It's not mentioned just in a list as other things are, but from here to here, so you need all those things to be liable. All right, now let's define, still in the Mishnah, Elu hahen charsanim, elu hahen zagim. What do these things refer to? Charsanim, elu achitzonim. Charsanim is the outside of a grape, the skin. Hazagim, elu apinimim, but the zagim is the inside, the seeds. Obviously, the rest of the grape, the flesh of the grape, is also prohibited, right? But that's the basic grape. So this comes to include even the parts that are not the main fruit of it. Dibre Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yosef omer shelo tit'eh kezog shel behema hachison zog v'apinimi inbal. And Rabbi Yosef says, no, I think it's the opposite way. And Rabbi Yosef hayanoten bahem simanim. That was Rabbi Yosef Galili. Okay, there's different Rabbi Yosef, but he also wants to give you a mnemonic so that you don't make a mistake. When you have a bell that's worn by an animal, like a cowbell, the zog is the outside of it. And so when you say, right, like a bell of an animal, so the outside is called a zog. The inside, the clapper, is called an inbal. So therefore, whenever you see the word zog, think of the zog, the outer part of a cowbell, and you'll remember that the zog refers to the outer part of the grape, the skin, whereas charsanim refers to the seeds. Okay, so those are the two different definitions. All right, now we come to the Gemara. Shelosha minin asurin benazir hatumah v'chule hayoseh min hagefen in gefen asmola. So since when the Mishnah mentioned the three things that are prohibited, it said that which comes from the vine. So only something what comes from the vine, meaning the grape, right, and the seeds and the skin. But the vine itself, meaning the wooden part of it, and the leaves, no, that is not prohibited. If a Nazir wants to go and consume some leaves from a vine, right, grape leaves, right, we eat lots of grape leaves in the form of yebra. It's delicious, so that's okay. He's permitted. Now that's what we derive from the language of the Mishnah. But we know matnitin de like to be el azad, de tanya to be el azad omed afilu alin vilulavin b'mashma. This Mishnah must be opposed to Ribbui el-Azar. This is not Ribbui el-Azar ben Azariah mentioned in the Mishnah, because Stam Ribbui el-Azar is Ribbui el-Azar ben Shamua, who is a direct student of Rabbi Akiva. That will be important for us in a few minutes. Ribbui el-Azar in this Braita says, Nazir is prohibited even to eat the leaves and the lulavin, tendrils. These are the soft parts on top of the plant that are edible, and those are also prohibited. So here's a really important machloket. Tanakama says it's only the grape that's prohibited, and Ribbui el-Azar ben Shamua says all the edible parts of the plant. Okay, that's one version of this discussion, and according to this version, Tanakama says it's permitted to eat the leaves. However, there's another version of this statement that applies it to the second part, the rest of the Mishnah. Regarding the punishment, the chiyuv, one is only punishable with lashes if one eats from the grapes a kezayit. So this is what we are analyzing. Min anavim in min hagefen asmo la. That the majority opinion says, from the grapes. That if he eats a kezayit from the grapes, liable to lashes. But if he eats a kezayit from the vine itself, from the leaves, then no liability to lashes. Still is a prohibition, but no liability to lashes. So you see, as Ika Damre would make an important difference. According to this, if a Nazir eats rolled grape leaves, that would be prohibited. It wouldn't get lashes. According to either way, it wouldn't get lashes according to the majority opinion, but according to this is still prohibited. According to the first reading, is permitted. So there's an important difference. Ma'nitin de like Ribbui el-Azar, and it's about this that we said, this Mishnah is not the opinion of Ribbui el-Azar. De tanya Ribbui el-Azar omer afilu alin v'lulavin b'mashma. He says no, that anavim means even all the parts of the vine that are edible, even the leaves, that would also be included and would be punishable if he ate a kezayit of grape leaves. All right, good. So now we want to see the source for this machloket between Rabbanan and Ribbui el-Azar. So we ask, B'mai kami palge? Ribbui el-Azar darish ribuye umi'ute, Rabbanan darshe kelale uPerat. All right, this is really fundamental. There are two different systems. Whenever the Torah has a general category and also mentions specifics, depending on the order and whether it's sandwiched or not. So these create ambiguities, right? Ambiguities. Does the Torah mean the specific examples, or does it mean the generality? Or how do we combine them? Is it some combination of the two? So there's two different systems of explaining this combination of general categories and specifics in a pasuk. One way is Ribbui and mi'ut. This was from the school of Rabbi Akiva, so it makes sense that Ribbui el-Azar ben Shamua, Rabbi Akiva's student, is going to use this system, whereas Rabbanan used a different system of Kelal uPerat. That's from the school of Rabbi Ishmael. So what's the difference between the two? This is a good example, as we're going to see. Ribbui and mi'ut works more technically, whereas Kelal and Perat works more conceptually, right? What's the essential key essence of the detail, and then we'll use that to generalize if it's a perat uklal uprat, which is going to be here. Okay, Rabbi Elazar darish ribui umi'ute ribuye umi'ute miyayin v'shechar yazir mi'et mikol asher ya'aseh migefen hayayin riba mi'et v'riba riba hakol mai riba kol mile mai mi'et shebishta. Okay, so let's look at the Pisukim. So we see how it works. So we're looking at Pisukim 3 and 4. This is all the elaboration on what does the prohibition of wine mean. So it starts with a few examples. These are this is the details. Miyayin v'shechar yazir chometz yayin v'chometz shechar lo yishteh. So he has to keep away from wine. Usually shechar means other intoxicants, but the Midrash explains it as old wine, right? Intoxicating wine. He has to keep away also from vinegar, and from old vinegar he cannot drink. Also, anything that the grape is steeped in. We learned a lot of laws about tarovet, about mixtures of one prohibited thing and something permitted from these words. So anyway, anything that the grapes are steeped in, he cannot drink. And the grapes themselves, whether they are fresh or dried, like meaning raisins, he cannot eat them. Okay, so those are all specific details. And then it goes to a generality. Kol yemez nizro mikol asher yaseh migefen hayayin. Anything that is made from the grapevine. So you see, if you're going to say everything, why do you need to bother listing all these specific details? So this is strange. So this is the mi'ut, and this is the ribui. And now notice that there is another phrase, mecharsanim ve'adzag lo yochel, which is another list of detailed examples. And based on this, we are going to call it in the for Rabbanan, for the system of Ribbui Ishmael, this is going to be a perat. This whole pasuk is a perat. This is a kelal, and this is going to be another perat. So the Rabbanan are going to take account of three phrases: kelal, perat, and kelal. Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua, on the other hand, is not considering this marchatzanim ba'adzag, apparently because he's going to agree with the other Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, who in the Mishnah used this to teach us that you're only liable if you have both the seeds and the skins. So this is left out of this first derasha. Okay, so here we go. This is the details. Here is the generality, and this means that we have, according to the Rabbi Elazar, miyayin de shechar, that's the details. So that's going to be something that's limiting, right? The individual examples are a limiting factor, and when it says everything, that's a generalizing factor. And whenever you have mi'et v'riba, riba hakol, the rule is that we go follow the generality. It's kind of like sometimes you'll give a few examples. You ask someone, can you get me orange juice, apple juice, water, anything to drink, right? So if a person says that, they're giving some examples, but really once they say anything to drink, it's clear that those examples are really just mean the generality, and I'm okay with drinking anything, right? I just started off with a few examples. So we follow really the generality. So what are we including? We're including everything, every type of parts of the grapevine, including the fruit itself, and of course the skin and the seeds and the leaves and the soft parts of the tendrils. All that is included according to Rabbi Elazar. Now, you still have to take into account the mi'ut. My mi'et, if you gave examples, you have to learn something from the examples, right? There has to be something that's excluded. Okay, yeah, well, we'll allow that to exclude something. We're going to exclude the branches, the hard branches, which aren't edible at all. Okay, that's excluded, right? So in my example, if I said orange juice, grape juice, right? So I want, some kind of juice, some kind of liquid, right? And I don't want something that's out of the category completely. That's would not be good. All right. So here you see it works in a kind of technical way. We're really following the inclusion of the riba, and the mi'ut is just taking out something that wouldn't be usable in any case. All right, so that's the first system. Now, Rabbanan dashe kelale uPerat. The opinion of the majority here follows the Rabbi Ishmael system that follows Kelal and Perat. So here it goes. Miyain v'shechar yazir Perat. So when it gives the examples, and here just like in the last time, it's only quoting the first three words, but it really means the entire pasuk of detailed examples. That is a limitation. But then this is everything. Well, that's a generality. And then it goes and continues. So it's going following the majority before. That doesn't have to learn anything from here, right? Even if you have just seeds, a kazait of them, you'd be liable. So now this is available to use for this derasha. Chazar uPerat, this is another example of details. So perat uklal uPerat. Now we have a sandwich structure, and whenever you have a sandwich structure, it works like this. Yatadan ela ke'en haperat. Ma perat meforash peri upesolet peri. Avkol peri upesolet peri. So when you have a klal uPerat uklal uPerat, actually it works if you have klal uPerat uklal also, but this happens to be the detail, the generality detail. Here's what you have to do. We mean, of course, you're going to include what's in the details, right? That's for sure. But the generality in the middle comes to tell you anything that is essentially similar to the details. The detail's not going to give you everything, right? So if I say I want, give me some orange juice, a drink, apple juice, by saying that, well, for sure you can give me apple juice or orange juice, but by saying anything in the middle, I mean, I want some kind of fruit juice, right? What do these have in common? What's the essence? I want fruit juice, and I don't want soda, for example, right? So you have to find some way to generalize the details. So not everything has to be something that is essentially similar to the particulars. And so what is that in this case? Well, the details that are explicit, those all refer to the fruit or the fruit waste, like the seeds, like the skins, or like vinegar, as we're going to see. These are all things that come from the fruit, but essentially it's the fruit itself. And so, since all the examples that were mentioned in that first pasuk are all based on the fruit itself, so too we'll say anything that's from the fruit itself is included by the kelal. But this would exclude the branches, and it would also exclude the leaves and the tendrils. Those are not part of the prohibition, or at least not part of the punishment. Okay, good. Now we're going to challenge this, because whenever you have learning what's essential about the details, well, you can, what is essential about the details? You can make a more limited definition or a more expansive definition. And so here we just made a pretty limited definition, but maybe we can challenge that. Ima perat meforash peri gamor, af kol peri gamor. Well, maybe we should say, just like the details are talking about a ripe fruit, so maybe the prohibition is only about a ripe fruit. So actually here we're going to make an even more limited definition. And so what's prohibited? Well, then the examples in that pasuk was all parts or wholes or parts or derivatives of a whole ripe fruit. But maybe and so we're going to generalize anything like that, but that will exclude an unripe fruit or a fruit that's wormy or a problematic one. Those would be permitted. And so maybe we should use this even more limited definition of what's essential. And so we're going to say, no, that's not a good reading. Why? Amarta, imken mahiniach lecha katu b'mashma'o shelo amaro. If you're going to only include the parts of a ripe fruit and its derivative, well, then that's all the things that are actually mentioned explicitly. So what else would the inclusion clause be including, right? So let's look at the list. Anavim lachim v'beshim haketive, yain v'chomis haketive. If you want to talk about the grapes, whether they're fresh or dried out, raisins, that's mentioned explicitly in the pasuk. If you want to talk about wine and vinegar, those are also explicitly in the pasuk. So already you have anything that is from a ripe grape, or anything that comes from a ripe grape. So those are all the possibilities are already excluded. So then, what would the generality come to add to that if there's nothing else that it's adding? So therefore, we go back to the first reading. Let's abandon this proposal of a very limited definition, and we're going to go to the more expanded one. And in this, so to summarize what we have, the first pasuk mentioned a whole bunch of things that have to do with ripe fruits, and then it said, and anything that comes from the grapevine. So this anything is adding to it. What is it adding? Even something that would be an unripe fruit or a wormy grape and things like that are also similar. It's from the grape itself, not from the branches, not from the leaves. So it has to include something. So that's what we're going to include. All right, good. Now, u'me'achar shesofen l'rabot kol davar ma tamud lomar mechar sanim ve'ad zag. לומר לך, כל מקום שאתה מוצא פירת וכלל, אתה רשאי למושכו לדונו כעין הפירת. אלא נעשה כלל מוסף על הפירת עד שיפרוט לך כתוב כדרך שפרט לך בנזיר. Okay, now the next question is about the last pirat. So since from the Kelal and from the pirat and the Kelal, we just learned that we're going to include all parts of the grape, right, whether ripe or not, and all derivatives from it, the vinegar, and so that would include the skin and the seeds as well. So since all that's already included, then what is the last phrase that says from skins to pits? What is that doing? What is that adding? Here they say from pits to grape. All right, either way. So what is that adding it? What is that adding to us? We already know that is going to be part of the prohibition. Oh, this teaches us a methodology of how to interpret perat uklal uPerat. So it teaches us that anytime you have perat ukelal, in other words, if you have only perat ukelal, that works totally differently. Then you cannot broaden it, but rather it's all and say anything that is like the perat. You can't do that. What we just did. Rather, it's like kelal musaf ala perat. There we have to assume that the kelal, which is last, is adding to the perat. In other words, as follows: if you have only two clauses, perat uklal, then you just assume that it's all in the kelal, right? If I say I want this kind of juice, that kind of juice, anything to drink, then you have to assume I was just thinking of examples, but really all drinks are going to be included in that category. And so that's why you need another one. But if you have kelal uPerat, you have perat ukelal uPerat, if it's sandwiched, only then do we use this in between. We take the essential character of the details, and we generalize from the essential character. That's what we do in a kelal, perat uklal uPerat, or in a perat uklal uPerat. Anytime you have a sandwich, we use the generalizing the essential parts of the peratim. Whereas if you have only two clauses, then it doesn't say it here, but you always follow the second one, right? Perat uklal is always going to be a generality. Kelal uPerat is always going to be just a detail. For example, if I say, "Get me anything to drink," orange juice, apple juice. Since I said that second, it's evident that when I said anything to drink, I really meant that I want, those kinds of juices. Okay, so that's why we need the ending parat, not because it tells us anything more. We would know from the generality of the essence, from the first list, that skins and seeds would be included. But we need that at the end, just to have something at the end, so that it's a parat uklal uPerat. All right, fantastic. So it's really fundamental to understand the difference between the Rabbi Akiva Midrashim and the Rabbi Ishmael Midrashim. And so now we end just with one more insight on that braita, Amar Mor ma perat meforash peri upesolet peri, afkol peri upesolet peri. So peri inve pesolet peri maihi chometz. Okay, in the braita it said that what's the essence of the detail? It's something that's defined as a fruit or something that comes from the garbage, the waste from the fruit, the leftovers after you squeeze them, what is left over. So too, anything that is either the fruit or something that comes from the fruit, that is what's prohibited. Good. So now let's define what these terms are. What does mean piri? Well, that's the grape itself. And what is fruit waste? What is that? That means chometz. Comes from it. We've tried to make wine, but then some of it turns into vinegar. So that's the leftover waste is called vinegar. All right. Okay. Now afkol piri. So now that baraita continues and says, so too anything that is part of the grape. So maihi go harki. So what is that including? Anything that's if I know it says grapes already, right? So we're trying to figure out what are we adding to the detailed list. The detailed list said grapes. So if I say anything that's similar to that essence, that's including even unripe grapes. Are also in it. Afkol dipsolet peri maihi. And now when we say we're adding something to the waste itself is vinegar. But vinegar is listed explicitly in the pasuk. So what is the kelal adding that's essentially like it? Amarav kana letuye inve dichrin. That's coming to include grapes that are wormy. Ve'adzag amaravina latuye deben habenayim. And so now I also know that the skin is going to be included in the seeds because it says that at the end of the pasuk. So when it says something essentially like that, what is that coming to include? That's the parts in between, right? There may be the pulp, or little grapes that are stuck in the middle, or something like that. All those things are included. And so basically, to summarize what we have for Rabbanan, is we have a whole list of items in the Mishnah, in the Pasuk itself, that includes the grapes and dried grapes, raisins, it includes vinegar, and includes the grapes and the skin. So what it mean? What do we do with the kalal from everything? Oh, that's going to include even these other items that maybe you'll say, well, a wormy grape, an unripe grape, some part of it that's in between. Maybe those would not be considered prohibited. No, those are all part of the prohibition. But it's really anything that is part of the grape or comes from the grape is limited to that. Grape leaves and tendrils are permitted according to Rabbanan. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen ve'amen.